Welcome everyone to another exciting week of Ramban ala Parsha. This week we have the great schus of reading Parshas Vayechi. And Vayechi is kind of an interesting parsha in that it's dominated by the brachot. And if you have a certain age, it's more likely that you know the brachot of Yaakov by heart than you actually know what they mean. And I include myself in that. It's like v'zos habracha, right? The educational philosophy used to be, if you can't teach the substance, so memorize it. And okay, we'll see if we could do something about that today. But let's start with, we may have done it last year, but it's kind of a fascinating and a classic Ramban. The parsha opens, obviously, Vayechi, Yaakov eretz Yisrael shva esrei shana, Vayehi yimei Yaakov shnei chayav sheva shanim v'arbaim vat shana, Vayikrevu yimei Yisrael lamus. Okay, however it is, Yaakov realizes this is about to die, and he calls his son, his beloved son Yosef, Vayomer lo imno matzadichem enechos imno yadcha tachat yirechi, V'asita imadi chesed ve'emet al na tikbereni b'mitzrayim. Rather, v'shachavtim avotayim nusatani b'mitzrayim ukvartayim b'kfuratam, v'ayomar anochi esek hidvarecha. That should have been the end of the parsha. But the pasuk continues. Vayomer hishavali, vayishavalo, vayishtachu Yisrael al rosh hamita. So what is it? Yaakov's making. Yosef says, "Fine, I'll do it. You know, we have a close relationship. We love each other. You're my father, you asked me to do it, I'll do it." Vayomer hishav ali. So Ramban is obviously bothered by that, as we all should be. What's the need for a shvuah? So just very quickly, the Ramban says, Lo haya Yaakov choshed bivno hatzadik he'ahuv lo sheyamre al mitzvat aviv v'al hadavar shivticho v'amar anochi esek dvarecha. It's not that, he says the Ramban, no, it's not that Yaakov didn't trust Yosef. He loved Yosef, of course he trusted him. It wasn't for Yosef's benefit. He wanted Yosef to be able to say to Paro, listen, Paro, I swore to my father that I'm going to bury him in Eretz Canaan. I'm going to bury him in the land that he lived the overwhelming majority of his life, in the land in the family burial place. I'm going to bury him there. And in the end, the Ramban points out, that seems to have won the day. Okay? He says, in addition, Yosef would have to try harder because he took a shvuah. V'chein haya hadavar kimo she'amar alei ukvar et avicha ka'asher hishbi'echa. He said, in the end, that's what Paro said. You can go and bury your father. You know why? Because you swore to him that you would. And Paro took a shvuah more seriously than he would have just taken if Yosef said to his father, promise me. And that's something that's useful to know. And it also leads us into some Ramans that we're not going to do. But having listened to the importance of being buried in Ma'arat HaMachpelah and being buried with Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, you have to ask yourself, why didn't Yosef want the same thing? Why didn't Yosef ask to be buried there also? So there the answer is, and maybe we'll get to the Ramban at the end of the parsha, maybe we won't. The answer is that Yosef understood, everybody understood, that Ma'arat HaMachpelah were for the Avot. The Avot are three, they're Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. Yosef may have been the greatest tzaddik in the world, he may have done the greatest things for Bnei Yisrael. Yosef was not one of the Avot, and so therefore Yosef said, yes, I want to be buried in Eretz Yisrael. And our understanding is that all of the brothers were buried in Eretz Yisrael. But they're buried where they're buried. Yosef is buried in Shechem, in Nablus now, in Shechem, and it's a problem, and you can't visit, and if you do, you get shot at, and all kinds of problems with that. But you should know, it's a historical decision. The idea of Ma'aseh Avos Simun Labanim, which is a foundational principle for the Ramban, it only applies to the Avot. If it happened to Yosef, it doesn't mean it's going to happen to us. If it happened to Yitzchak, if it happened to Yaakov, if it happened to Abraham, it's going to happen to us. There's a difference in the Avot and those who came before him, and it's almost like, Lahavdil, Elef, Alfei, Avdal, the founding fathers of the United States. Okay, Washington, Jefferson, those are the people at the beginning, but that's all. Abraham Lincoln is not one of the founding fathers. He may be an important president, he's not one of the founding fathers. Binyamin Netanyahu may be a really, really important person in the history of the state of Israel, maybe the most important person, I don't know. But he's not Ben Gurion, and he's not Begin. He wasn't part of 1948. He wasn't part of founding the state. He's not a founding father. He's an important person. He's not a founding father. Lahavdil, Elef, Alfei, Avdalos. Okay, now, let's really start with a fascinating pasuk. The Torah tells us in pasuk Chaf Beit, Yaakov says to Yosef, "Va'ani natati lecha Shechem achad al achecha." I'm giving you an additional portion. Rashi has two pshatim, either an additional portion or literally I'm giving you the city of Shechem. Asher lakachti miyad ha'emori b'charbi u'v'kashti. That I took myself from the Emorim b'charbi u'v'kashti. Wait, what's going on? What do you mean he took it? Yaakov didn't fight. He took it b'charbi u'v'kashti. And here we have like a really, really interesting idea. And the interesting idea is as follows. Says the Ramban, Asher lakachti b'charbi u'v'kashti, ki haaretz lo tichbosh lahem rak b'cherev u'v'keshet. Here, you have to pay attention to this. It's a dialectic that I think is really critical to how we see modern history and how we see the conquest of Eretz Yisrael. First of all, the Ramban says when Yaakov says Asher lakachti mi'amri b'charbi u'v'kashti, he's telling Yosef, you need to know the following. Yes, God has promised you the land of Israel, but it's going to be a war. There's going to be a fight. Every place you take in Eretz Yisrael is going to be a result of a military conquest. Even Yericho. Yes, we marched around it 7 times, we blew shofar, and then the walls fell in. And what happened then? Ask yourselves, what happened then? All the people just died of a cold? No, we had to go in and kill them. We had to win a war. Yes, at that point it was obvious what was going to happen. They were terrified and it was going to be an easy battle. But it had to be a battle, says the Ramban. Yirmoz l'ma shamar katuv, the pasuk says, Lo hayta ir asher hishlima et bnei Yisrael bilti achivi yoshvei givon et hakol lakhu b'milchama. Why? Ki me'et Hashem hayta lechazek libam likrat ha'milchama el Yisrael l'man hacharimam. That's the pasuk in Yoshua. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, I'm going to make sure that each place that you conquer, you have to conquer. No one's just going to give in. No one's going to surrender. You're going to have to take it on your own. Okay, so here the sense you get so far is that, you need a strong army. You need to do things, and you can't rely on miracles, and you can't rely on zchut avot. It's all you. V'yiches. Now, why bicharbi uvikashti? What's going on there? Says the Ramban. V'yiches hacherev v'hakeshet elav. Well, why was it his cherev and his keshet? Ki zichuto hi ha'oseh imam milchama. V'hi hanilcham lahem. Says the Ramban, and this is really an amazing example of ma'aseh avot siman labanim. Says the Ramban, Yaakov Avinu attributes the future victory of Klal Yisrael in a war that they're going to have to fight to him. It was his chus. Lo heim atzmam. Yes, it was your army, and nowadays it's your tanks and it's your air force, but it says Yaakov Avinu, but it's my zchut. Ukinyan shemar katuv ki lo becharbam yirshu eretz uzroam lo hoshia lamo ki yimincha uzroacha v'or panacha ki ritzitam. Okay, this is a bit of Kabbalah in the middle of a regular Ramban, but the point is, and really it's an amazing point, says the Ramban, on the one hand, you need a strong army. On the one hand, you're going to have to win a war. On the other hand, when you win the war, know that it's not kochiva otzam yadi asuli etachai lazeh. The reason why you're winning the war is because of zchut avot. The reason why you're winning the war is because HaKadosh Baruch Hu promised you the land. Yes, you have to fight. And couldn't HaKadosh Baruch Hu have just given you the land, miraculously? Couldn't they have all just died of a cold? Yes. But he chose not to. And the Ramban thinks, and this really is reminiscent of other Rambans, the idea that for the Ramban, a miracle is that which HaKadosh Baruch Hu does that completes your action. You have an air force, and you have an army, and you have strategy. And you have to maximize all of that. And after you maximize all of that, comes zchut avot. After you maximize all of that, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, well, now that I see that you've put your lives on the line, and not just put your lives on the line, God forbid, and unfortunately, people die in wars. And people from our team die in wars, and it's a tragedy. Why HaKadosh Baruch Hu sets it up that way, I don't know. But he's saying both things are necessary. On the one hand, you have to go fight. On the other hand, once you go and fight, then bicharbiu v'kashti. Then Yaakov Avinu says, it's my cherv and my keshet. I didn't really do anything. No, his chut is going to carry over to us. Now, very last point of this Ramban. V'karov elai od she'asa Yaakov k'derech she'asu ha'neviim. It's also possible that Yaakov Avinu, says the Ramban, took symbolic action. Nata yado b'cherev kineged eretz ha'emori v'zarak sham chitzim liyotam nichbeshet levanav. We've seen this before in the Ramban, right? That symbolic action locks in the promise of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And if Yaakov Avinu symbolically conquered Shechem or other lands, that symbolic conquering by Yaakov will be for our benefit and will make it much more likely and much more certain that we're going to conquer Eretz Yisrael. Okay, a fascinating idea. Now, let's get into Birkot Yaakov, and let's do at least two of them, and two significant ones. One not so happy, and one more happy. Says the Torah, in Perek Memtet, Yaakov gathers all the sons, Vayikra Yaakov al-Banav, Vayimru hayasfu agida lachem eit asher yikra etchem ba'acharit hayamim. And the first ones are not so happy. Shimon v'Levi achim kelei chamas mecherotehem. So the Ramban, who was not a big fan of Shimon and Levi and what they did in Shechem, he says as follows. Pasuk Daled in my Ramban. Yomar Ba'alei Achva. First of all, a lovely thing. They genuinely are brothers. They're very close. They're Ba'alei Achva ki yecham libam al achotam. They together passionately loved Dinah and were offended by what Shechem and Hamor did to him, when Hamor in particular. Yilameid aleihem zechut. Even in the negative bracha that Yaakov is giving them, the Ramban says, you should see the good side. Ki bikinatam al ha'achva asu masha asu. They did it out of pure brotherly motivation. Lomar shehem re'uyim la'onesh gadol. Now, it doesn't change the fact they're worthy of a terrible punishment. V'lo hachet ro'uy limachel ki hu Hamas. The Ramban has to admit, when the Torah describes it as Hamas, it was dishonest, it was misleading to the Anshei Shechem. On the other hand, says the Ramban, Shimon v'Levi achim. They were really, really achim to each other and to Dinah. But that doesn't change the fact. And here the Ramban says difficult things for us to read. V'hanachon be'enai she'amar ki Shimon v'Levi achim gimurim domim umitachim zel hazeh ba'atzatem u'ma'asehem. They were brothers to the core. They shared all the same values. Ukvar perashti, at the same time, I've already explained, Ki Yaakov katzaf al Shimon v'Levi b'hargam anshe ha'ir. Yaakov was angry at them for massacring Shechem. Ba'avur she'asu Hamas. Right, without, beating it to death. They were dishonest. They were misleading. Maybe Hamas is a stronger word than that. Kihem, now the Ramban really kind of beats it to death in a way that's hard to read. Kihem lo chatu lahem klal. The people of Shechem, says the Ramban, didn't do anything to them. Yes, there's other places where the Ramban talks about the Zayin Mitzvahs ben Noach and the obligation, but he really thinks they didn't do anything wrong. Not only that, uba'u bibrit v'nimolu. Right? The sons of Yaakov made a suggestion. Okay, if you all get a bris milah, we'll marry you. And they did it. V'yashuvu el Hashem, says the Ramban, and I don't know if it's definitive, but he's saying, how does Shimon and Levi know that they weren't going to be chozer b'tshuva? V'yashuvu el Hashem, v'yihiyu kulam bichlal anshe beit Avraham. Right? We have this idea. Avraham megayer et hanashim, Sarah megayer et hanashim. Says the Ramban, how did they know that they wouldn't have been converts? How did they know that they wouldn't be mitzaref to the people who, the Pasuk says, nefesh means the people they converted, or the people they brought to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Says the Ramban, Shimon and Levi killed people who may have been willing to be part of the Jewish people. Va'od charalo shelo yamru ki ba'atzato na'aseh hadavar v'yihyeh chilul Hashem sheya'aseh hanavi chamas vashod. He said the second concern of Yaakov Avinu is that no one should see him as being dishonest. People may have said Yaakov made a deal with the Anshe Shechem and he betrayed them. He told them to get a bris milah, then he massacred them. The pasuk is clear, and the Ramban says this on the spot. Yaakov wasn't part of the deal. Yaakov sat there. He did not say a word. Right? They got together. Yaakov didn't say a word about it. V'zetam bisodam al tavo nafshi. Hitnatzlut shelo haya bisodam ba'avonam u'b'mirma. He wasn't part of the dishonesty. He wasn't part of the plan. U'bikalam lo nityached kishabo al ha'ir v'hargum v'lachen yikalel apam ve'evratam. Yaakov Avinu wanted it known. I wasn't part of the plan. I wasn't part of the massacre of Shechem. Shimon and Levi are real brothers, and I admire that. But they crossed the line, and they sinned, and I don't want to be part of that, and therefore, I'm cursing their apam and evratam, their anger. I'm not cursing them completely. That's Rashi's theme, but I want you to know I wasn't really part of this, and it's not something I'm proud of. Okay, that's hard for us. Again, Shimon, it's easy, but Levi, Levi, who's the progenitor of Moshe, and I don't know, it's hard. But the Ramban thinks that they really did sin, and the Ramban thinks that their father really did call them out on that. Okay, that's a negative, one of the negative brachot. Then you come to Yehuda. Yehuda, ata yoducha achecha yadecha ba'oref oivecha v'yishtachavu lecha b'nei avicha. Okay, skipping a pasuk. Lo yasur shevet mi Yehuda u'mechokek mi ben raglav ad ki yavo shilo v'lo yikatamim. Lo yasur shevet mi Yehuda. We understand, the Gemara understands, and the Ramban's going to understand that that's a promise that HaKadosh Baruch Hu makes to Yehuda that he will be the ruler. And the Ramban starts with kind of a surprising line. He says the negative. What does it not mean? Ein inyano shelo yasur la'olam. This is pasuk Yod in Parak Mem following inside. Says the Ramban, Ein inyano shelo yasur la'olam. He's not promising Yehuda that he'll have the kingship forever. Ki katuv yolech Hashem otcha ve'et malkecha shetakim alecha el goya shelo yadata tav avotecha. Says the Ramban, God knew at the time that there's going to be an exile for Klal Yisrael. And in exile, obviously, v'hinei heim u'malkam bigola. When they're in exile, right, Yehuda's not the king. He's not ruling. So what's going on? So here's an interesting fact, but it's something we should be aware of. The Ramban, as we all know, late in his life, had the disputation with Pablo Cristiani, and we have the record of it. And if you look there, one of Pablo Cristiani's strongest arguments from his side, from his perspective, is exactly this pasuk. It says, Lo Yasur Shevet Mi Yehuda, that Yehuda is going to rule forever. But look, it's not true. Right? We rule right now. We're the real Jews. The Romans are ruling the world, and you're not. So clearly, the Torah Shebichsav is telling you that it's somebody other than Yehuda who's going to rule. And this is something the Ramban spent a lot of time in the disputation disproving. And he says from the start, Ein inyano shelo yasur la'olam. No, it doesn't mean forever. So what does it mean? And let's spend some time on this because this is really, really important halachically and in the Ramban's thought. Okay. Ein lahem od melech v'sarim. V'yamim rabim ein melech b'Yisrael. It's clear from the start. Of course there are going to be times where there's no king of the Jews. V'hanavi lo yavtiach et Yisrael shelo yelchu bashevi b'shum inyan. Yaakov Avinu was not promising Bnei Yisrael they'll never live in exile. They'll never be in jail. Ba'avur shimloch alem Yehuda, because Yehuda is going to rule forever. That was never in the cards. It doesn't make any sense. Aval inyano shelo yasur shevet mi Yehuda el echad me'echav. No, pshat in the pasuk, says the Ramban, is that no other brother will rule. whenever there's a king, ki malchut Yisrael hamoshel alehem mimenu yihiyeh, v'lo yimshol echad me'echav alav. Says the Ramban, the bracha to Yehuda is when the monarchy rests with Am Yisrael, it will rest with Yehuda. That's all. It's not saying, oh, there's no king right now of the Jews, so there's some kind of tragedy and the nevuah didn't come true. Of course it came true. When there's a king, the king comes from Yehuda. Okay, and I'm skipping a few lines in the Ramban. V'hakatuv hazeh ramaz ki Yaakov himlich shevet Yehuda al echav v'horish li Yehuda hamemshala al Yisrael. V'hu ma she'amar David vayivcha Hashem Elokei Yisrael bi mikol beit David lihiyot lemelech al Yisrael. Right? The bracha that David HaMelech quoted to his brothers was based on this pasuk of Lo Yasur Shevet Miyehuda Le'olam. Ki bi Yehuda bachar l'nagid ubebeit Yehuda beit avi ubibnei avi ki ratzah lahamlich al kol Yisrael. Says David HaMelech in Divrei Hayamim Aleph, God wants Yehuda to rule, and of Yehuda God has chosen me. V'amar lo yasur lirmoz ki yimloch shevet acher al Yisrael. Now, the Ramban has to deal with the fact that there once was, and later on also, but the more striking question is, the first king of Yisrael was Shaul from Shevet Binyamin. That's a problem. That's a problem that Pablo Cristiano should have asked about. Okay, and he says, Aval me'et sheyachol lihiyot liYehuda shevet malchut. No, from the time that God gave the monarchy to Shevet Yehuda, lo yasur mimenu el shevet acher. V'zeu shenamar ki Hashem Elokei Yisrael natan mamlacha leDavid al Yisrael leolam lo ulebanav. Okay, another pasuk which makes it clear from Divrei Hayamim, which makes it clear that it's Shevet Yehuda. Now, what about Shaul? So says the Ramban. This is fascinating stuff. V'inyan Shaul haya ki ba'avur shedvar she'elat hamalchut ba'et hahi nit'av eitzel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He said the original request that Klal Yisrael made for a king, HaKadosh Baruch Hu disagreed with. Right? It's a big machlokes as a king, lechatchila b'diavad, when the people said, come to Moshe Rabbeinu and they say, Som tasim alecha melech kechol hagoyim asher svivotai. He says God hated that. Why? Lo ratzah lahamlich alehem min hashevet asher lo hamalchut shelo yasur mimenu lo'olam. God didn't want to give them a real king. He didn't want to give them a king from Yehuda, because once Yehuda becomes king, he's the king forever. V'natan lahem malchut sha'ah. He gave them a temporary monarchy. Ulezer ramaz hakatuv shamar etein lacha melech be'api v'ekach be'evrati. The pasuk says, yes, in Hosea, I gave them a king, but it was against my will. Shenatan lo shelo birtzono v'lachein lakchu be'evrato sheneherag hu ubanav v'nifsaka mimena hamalchut. And that's why the kingdom ended in a tragedy with the death of Shaul and the death of Yehonatan and the death of his family. Now, why did God hate the fact that they asked for a king? And this goes to the subtlety of the mitzvah, right? Is it a mitzvah? Is it not a mitzvah? Why would it be a mitzvah? So here he says, whatever the reasoning is, Haya kol zeh mipnei shaya Shmuel shofet v'navi v'lochem milchamtehem al pi Hashem Moshiach otam. There was no need for a king, right? The Ramban is hinting, yes, sometimes there's a need for a king, and sometimes the Jews look at other people and they need to rally around a king. But now when Shmuel Hanavi is alive, now when Shmuel is speaking to God and leading the Jewish people and inspiring the Jewish people in all the ways that a king would. Maybe there are generations in which it's appropriate to ask for a king. But now when Shmuel Hanavi is alive, Kimo Shamar Lohem, V'Hashem Elokechem Malkechem, V'Hakatuv Amar Lo Otcha Ma'asu Ki Oti Ma'asu. God says to Shmuel, they're not rejecting you, they're rejecting me. Mimloch Alehem, Ulefikach Lo Natan Lahem Malchut Shel Kayama. So he gave them a temporary monarchy which wasn't going to last. Okay, it's unfortunate if you feel bad for Shaul, but that's the point. Uma shamar katuv niskalta lo shamarta mitzvot Hashem asher tzivcha ki ata echin Hashem et mamlachtecha el Yisrael ad olam. So then why do people think, and why does the pasuk seem to say, or explicitly says, that Shaul was being punished for not wiping out Amalek, and therefore the Malchus Hashem was being transferred for him? It was always going to happen. She'im lo chata hayalizaro malchut b'Yisrael, lo al kulam, says the Ramban. Yes, had Shaul not sinned with Amalek, he would have had some form, and his descendants would have had some form of monarchy, but not on all the Jews. V'zet tam el Yisrael. He wouldn't be the monarch over all of Klal Yisrael, be the monarch over a portion of them. Okay, now, let's move on to something less exciting, but thank God it's after Hanukkah, so we don't have to feel bad about this. I'm skipping a little bit in the Ramban, and the Ramban says, and this is an important point to know, V'zeh haya onesh hachashmonaim. This is the punishment of the Chashmonaim, who we celebrated, last week or 2 weeks ago for Hanukkah. Shemalchu b'bayit sheni, ki hayu chasidei elyon. The first thing, says the Ramban, you have to know, the Chashmonaim were tzadikim gemurim. V'ilmalehem nishtakchu Torah v'hamitzvah miYisrael. And if it wasn't for the Chashmonaim, Judaism, God forbid, would have been wiped out. So the Ramban is not attacking the Chashmonaim, God forbid. He loved them. V'afal pikein ne'enshu onesh gadol ki arba b'nei Chashmonai hazaken hachasidim hamolchim ze achar ze im kol gevuratam v'atzlachatam naflu biyad oivehem becharev. But the 4 generations of Chashmonaim, the sons of Matisyahu, who ruled the Jewish people, eventually they were wiped out. V'higia ha'onesh b'sof l'masha amru razal kol man da'amim beit Chashmonai ka'asina avdahu. Anybody who claims to be a descendant of the Beit Chashmonaim means he's a slave. Shenichretu kulam ba'avon hazeh. What's the avon? They took on too much. Ve'afal pi shaya b'zera Shimon onesh minat tzdukim. Okay, there were minor things that the Chashmonaim did wrong, but the real sin was ela ba'avur zeh shemalchu v'lo hayu mizera Yehuda mi Beit David. It's a halacha, lo yasur shevet mi Yehuda. Yehuda is supposed to be the leader, the political leader of the Jewish people, not them. They were kohanim. Vehisiru hashevet u'mechokek legamrei v'ya'onesh mida kineged mida shehimshil hakadosh baruch hu aleim et avdehem ve'michritum. And that was their punishment. Their punishment was they became slaves and they were ruled over by others because they took on a job and they took on a role that wasn't meant for them. And then the Ramban says that explicitly. It's not just that they were from Shevet Menashe or Ephraim. No, they were Kohanim. Right? It raises the issue of, is Judaism a religion in which religion and politics are separated somehow? Is there a separation of church and state? I have no idea. But the Ramban is saying the Beit Chashmonaim or Kohanim, their job was to be the spiritual leaders of Bnei Yisrael. When they took on the job of political leaders of Bnei Yisrael, that was the problem, and that was the sin, and they violated this pasuk of Lo Yasur Shevet Mi Yehuda. And that's the Ramban's complicated position on the Chashmonaim. And that's the Ramban's, nuanced position really on the brachot. There are great, great things in the brachot, and there are less great things. And Shimon and Levi did the wrong thing, and Yehuda did the right thing, and God gave him rulership and over all of the Shvatim, but only temporary, not temporary in the sense that they'd be replaced, but temporary in the sense that it doesn't mean every day forever. When there's a ruler over Bnei Yisrael, and God willing, when Mashiach comes, not all of us will be able to run for prime minister. Presumably, it would have to be from Shevet Yehuda. I'm not 100% sure of that, but I think so. Okay, that's the Ramban. Those are the Rambans for this week. Becharbiu v'kashti, Yaakov Avinu says, and this is really the most important idea, that on the one hand, the Jewish people have to conquer Eretz Yisrael, and maybe we, the continuation, have to continue fighting for Eretz Yisrael. On the other hand, while doing that, we have to know that it's the Zchut Avot and it's HaKadosh Baruch Hu who's saving us. Shimon and Levi did the wrong thing in Shechem. Yes, they were true brothers, but they did the wrong thing, and Yaakov wanted no part of that. Lo Yasur Shevet Mihuda, that's the disputation, and that's the Ramban's subtle understanding that it doesn't mean forever. It means when there's a leadership of the Jewish people, it will come from Shevet Yehuda. That's it for today. Yashkach to all. Shabbat Shalom, and see you next week, God willing.